everyone for coming today. We really appreciate you attending and your time, so thank you for that. I am here to welcome our visiting speaker, Valoree Gagnon. She is an assistant professor in the College of Forest Resources and Environmental Science, as well as the director for University-Indigenous Community Partnerships at the Great Lakes Research Center at Michigan Tech University. Valoree's interdisciplinary expertise in environmental policy, food sovereignty, and community engaged research focuses on human dimensions of natural resources and the socio-cultural impacts of legacy toxic compounds, particularly on fishing communities. Her research, teaching, and service center on elevating Indigenous peoples' knowledge, facilitating equitable research and practice design,
This chair. Thank you, Riley. It looks like we're going to get some more chairs going on, so there'll be a little bit of movement. I'm really thankful to be here today. And I also have prepared an acknowledgement that I'd like to begin here. And this will be the only thing I read. The rest I'll just yak at you. And so I always like to begin with an acknowledgement of and for land and life. And yet, please know that the acknowledgement I've prepared is inherently flawed. No matter how thoughtful and intentional, a few minutes of words couldn't possibly be inclusive of everyone in the past and of the present that should be honored, remembered, and known. But in my ignorance, I will acknowledge what I know to be true. I acknowledge the human communities who have resided and continue to reside within these lands, the Wyandot and the Anishinaabe Three Fires Confederacy, the Ojibwa, Odawa, and Potawatomi, and others before them. I personally am unaware of their names, even though we all know that they indeed had names. I acknowledge the countless more than human communities, the water beings, those with fins or without fins, and the land beings, the rooted ones such as plants and trees, and the web of livelihoods residing under the surface and support all the two- and four-legged and the many more-legged and the no-legged, and also the sky beings, those with wings. I acknowledge the sun and the 13 moons and all their earthly relatives, including seasons, the four directions of winds, mountains, and the many forms and bodies of water, including the Great Lakes. I acknowledge Indigenous peoples as our region's original caretakers and knowledge keepers, and their centuries-long relationships as the foundation for the ongoing stewardship of the world's largest system of fresh water. This afternoon at the University of Michigan, this is my first time here, I learned that we're centered today within ceded territory established by the 1817 treaty at the foot of the rapids. And it is my understanding that this treaty includes commitments yet to be fully realized. Treaties are decreed to be the supreme law of the land in the United States by the Constitution, and the importance of treaty rights to Indigenous citizens are comparable to the importance of constitutional rights to American citizens. So we share rights, and even importantly, let's acknowledge our shared responsibilities, honoring our ancestors and protecting land and life for future generations. So miigwech for allowing me to read that and share that with you. I will introduce a little bit more about myself. My pronouns are she and her, and also important to all of us are kin, all of us are relatives and acquaintances. I also use kith and kin, which is cut off right there at the corner. I am Korean. I was born in Seoul, South Korea, and I also have British, Irish, and Scottish heritage as well. But I'm much more than all the things that Riley just read about me. I am a partner, a mother, sister, daughter, auntie, BFF. My BFF is one of the best people in the whole world, and I see that was cut off. Can we move that bar to the top maybe somewhere? I am a dog lover, gardener, jammer, like dark berries. Whoops. Gonna go back. Fish protector, water walker, and yeah, I'm an assistant professor and a director, but all the important stuff is right up on top. We all came in this room much more than whatever the role or your title is here at this university. We need to bring all that with us in the work that we do. That's okay, that might be the best spot for it, I think. Yeah. And now this is not working? Okay. So the title of the talk today is Bridging Western and Indigenous Knowledges Through University-Indigenous Community Partnerships, Sharing Guidance from the Seasons of Research Framework. When Margaret asked me for my title, I think I went a little overboard. A few weeks ago, I looked at my title and my abstract, and I was like, holy cow. I was being very optimistic about what I could achieve today, but I've tried to address all these parts. And please know there are lots of resources in here, and also I'm happy to share any other resources that you think that I might have as well. So let's get started. My outline. I'm actually going to start with the conclusion. We all may as well know where we're going. Then I want to talk a little bit more about bridges and bridging. It is this term that has come to mean many things, and so I want to explain what I mean when I use those terms. And then I want to share a little bit about my research foundations. I do a lot of different kinds of work. So, you know, how did all of this start? And then finally talk a little bit about some of the partnership work that I'm doing, which, by the way, is always like in process, right? Nothing is really done. Some things have been accomplished, but it's really about like building and then maintaining and strengthening those partnerships. And so the conclusion, I have three big rules in thinking about doing work and bridging knowledge systems with communities. And the first one, above all, prioritize land and life. I just went to lunch with the group. I was talking about respecting relationships with the earth, and it's just another way of saying you have to prioritize land and life in the work that you're doing to engage equitably with community partners. And this includes being thoughtful and intentional, be deliberate, and make it evident. You know, like not just I say I do this, or, you know, it's in an intro paragraph, but in your daily engagement, it's very evident that you prioritize land and life. Apply institutional, academic, and scientific tools, methods, and resources for the protection, restoration, and revitalization of land and life. I think this is so important to really center land and life and making that obvious in the work that you do. Second, know the ins and outs of your subject and project, the communities, stakeholders, rights holders, and especially yourself. Right now, if you're thinking, I'm not sure about if this is for me, that's totally okay. You have to know yourself well enough to know if you are up to this kind of work. And if not, there's lots of different kinds of ways that you can still be engaged and contribute. And then finally, being humble, which requires a groundedness, vulnerability, an openness to unlearning and relearning, using your gifts with, by, and as others who are also using their gifts. I think this is really important and an interesting thing I've learned not too long ago. Even that word humble in Latin gets its roots from being human, which gets its roots from the earth. And so all those things about earthly, grounded, humility, and human, all those terms are connected. So bridges and bridging. And this actually is a photo when I went on a family trip several years ago of the bridge from Upper to Lower Michigan that I did take. And all of you know I came from Upper Michigan yesterday. And one thing I want to point out, oh, you can't see it anymore, but this photo was taken in 2010. And so I, in 2010, had no idea of the kinds of things that I understand and know today. And so it's through many years of experiences and learning from the communities and learning from others that I've come to understand this idea of bridging. And so it's really rooted in this phrase called ethical space of engagement. I've added 4 in parentheses because I don't think it's just like a theoretical kind of space or concept, but it's also for engagement. You have to actually be in a place, so it's in practice as well. And this work actually is by Willie Ermine, and he talks about ethical space as a framework for guiding respectful interaction across cultural differences, and also about building space of mutual trust and respect. And Ermine actually got his ideas from Robert Poole, who talks about working in the space between 2 knowledge systems, a space that no one owns, and again, involves openness and mutual learning. And I really like to point out where this comes from, because these ideas, as you can see, they're not brand new, right? People have slowly been having conversations. It's just more people are listening and asking now. And I think that's why even I only discovered these things like a handful of years ago as well. And then I think of this space and place between Western and Indigenous knowledges. And so what's going on in that ethical space? Different philosophies, communities, professionals, disciplines, and institutions are coming together. And of those many kinds, you know, there's many different kinds of intellects, methods, approaches, expertise, and skills. I sometimes think about like different groups of people coming to a bridge like with your own toolbox, and not everyone has the same thing, and we're all there to build and strengthen and sustain that space conceptually, but also real places getting together. And through some time and deliberate effort, you do start to develop some shared expectations together, learn each other's different vocabularies, which can be very diverse. And I'm not talking about like across languages, but even in our own language, what one term can mean for one group does not mean the same thing for another. And that's just one word. We really have lots and lots of words like that in our vocabularies. And start creating that shared vision, establishing some goals. And you can share some ethics in common to really think about moving forward with specific actions to achieve justice for all those that are involved. I also want to share that I learned from Robin Wall Kimmerer, actually, who speaks about this quite a bit, about the strengths in these different knowledge systems. So we think of Western sciences really has a gift for seeing. We can think about that when think about the telescope or the microscope. Now we have big data and models and forecasts into the future. It's really about that seeing, and we rely a lot on our vision in the Western sciences. And in the Indigenous sciences, we talk about the gift of listening and having more relational and cognitive intellect and more intuitive ways of knowing. And things that we sometimes may call intuitive is because, or coincidental sometimes, I think those are the things that we just don't have the words to explain, but they are there. And we should also be listening to that intuition as well. So to really summarize, I have thought a lot about this, and this short and sweet list here actually took me years to think about, like, how can you boil this down about what is bridging and what takes place with bridges. And you really need to think about it as not a divider, but the bridge is a pathway. And the bridge is not for consultation, which is a term we hear quite often, but for interaction. It's not for confrontation, but for cooperation. And it doesn't mean that everything needs to be in opposition of each other, but actually complementary. Very important, not to integrate differences, but to maintain integrity. So scientists aren't trying to create indigenous Western scientists, and indigenous knowledge systems are not trying to change Western sciences, but you're maintaining the integral parts of your system. That's very, very important. And finally, this isn't just theory, but can also be put into practice. And so a little bit about my foundations. I have colleagues and students who don't know where my foundations are, just because it looks like I do like a variety of different kinds of things. But actually my foundations are in fish, risk, and health. Fish being accumulated with a variety of different contaminants such as mercury, PCBs, dioxins. This poses various risks, health risks for different people, some more vulnerable than others, but also socio-cultural risks for the many practices associated with fish and fishing in different parts of Indigenous languages are also at risk. And so I think of health also more holistically, cultural health, physical health. And so this is really where I got started. Oh, here's the 2010. They asked for a volunteer. Who wants to man the hose? And that was me. So that was a live fish release. I started a volunteer internship with the Keweenaw Indian community and their natural resources department. A couple of things also, sorry, I got ahead of myself. I did want everyone to be made aware that fish consumption and other marine reliant diets remains the primary route of exposure to toxic substances. This is an old Michigan one, but it just did a really demonstrates why and how important when we think about fish consumption. There are, I don't know, it's upwards to like 6,000 national fish advisories these days. The EPA stopped counting in 2012. And by then they were almost to 5,000. And I also learned that Great Lakes Indigenous communities consume 2 to 13 times more fish than the average American, corresponding to exposure levels well above safety standards. And also it says like average American, even in the Great Lakes region, people who are not Indigenous still consume 2 to 4 times more than the average American because we're in this region. And so there's a lot of different kinds of communities that depend on harvesting fish and consuming them. And so, yes, I started volunteering in 2010 with the Keweenaw Bay Indian Community Band of Lake Superior Ojibwa. There on Keweenaw Bay, Lake Superior, I learned that I'm about an hour away from Lake Erie. I may or may not get to visit this time, but if not, there can be a next time. I wanted to say a few important things about who KBIC is. Definitely a fishing people. And they were the first tribe in Michigan to achieve federal recognition in 1936. 1971, their treaty rights were reaffirmed with the People versus John Doe case in the Michigan Supreme Court. They were the first tribal nation in the nation to have their treaty rights reaffirmed. Shortly after, tribes in Idaho, the Pacific Northwest, and Wisconsin went on to win landmark cases of their own. At that same time of the reaffirmation of treaty rights, it coincided with the very first fish consumption advisories. It was actually mercury warnings in the St. Clair River. And so think about that overlap in time was really important to my early graduate studies. 1982, Indian gaming begins in someone's garage in the Keweenaw Bay Indian community. He's known as the father of Indian gaming, which is billions of dollar industry today. And then in 1989, they used much of their casino money to fund their first fish hatchery. And then just a few years ago, they received approval for their Clean Water Act TAS application, being the first tribe in Michigan to receive that designation. And they are in the process of creating their water quality standards right now. And so that is really important for all of you to think about, like the communities that you are surrounded by. Who are they? How did their history move forward? What accomplishments do they have, and what might be their priorities? And so when I started learning these things, I was really in awe because I had already lived within the community for several years and not even realizing like the lands that I was walking on, how important that was there, and also thinking nationwide. And so I have to say, from that very first project, then I moved on into doing my dissertation work, and really the partnerships grew from there. And so I just want everyone to take a minute in thinking about this term, partnership. It's actually pretty common these days for somebody to identify as a partner or someone else as a partner, and thinking about what are the characteristics of a good partnership. What words come to mind?
Mutuality, equality, partners.
Yes. Trust, mutuality, anything else? Yes. Honesty and transparency. Yeah, what did you say? Respect. Yeah. Yeah. And so I think so many times we think about this, you know, this term and this concept and a practice, a partnership, as if it's something like we're unfamiliar. Like, I'm not sure how to build a partnership, but actually we really already do. Many of us understand what that means. And so why would we think that it would be different when we think about different communities? I'm sure that all of you agree that in having a genuine partnership, there's FaceTime. You see them, you interact with them, you go to the same kinds of things, you attend events, meals, you help each other out, you know each other's needs. And so when we're thinking about partnerships, we have to think about what we already know. And we know a lot about what are some of those characteristics that make a good partnership. And so this Seasons of Research framework that was created, it was a really long process. And one of my students, now Dr. Emily Shaw, actually she drew this on her iPad one day several years ago. And we worked with the Keweenaw Bay Indian community on each of these seasons. And this is actually on the KBIC website. And it doesn't look like this anymore, right? It's a beautiful trifle that was made with the help of a designer. But it's also a model that's familiar to many Indigenous groups. And because it starts in the east, like where the sun rises, it starts with relationship building. And we all know, because we're all in different kinds of relationships, that never ceases, right? But it is continuous. And in thinking about the characteristics of a good partnership, and these surround all of the seasons: respect, reciprocity, responsibility, and reverence. And so we came to know our own processes through much dialogue together with the Keweenaw Bay Indian community, myself, who was just very early career, mentoring my very first PhD student, and realizing that this was the process that we were a part of relationship building, planning and prioritization with each other, knowledge exchange, and synthesis and application. And then those seasons continue. And yes, it means that it is a long-term commitment. And it also reminded me, oh yeah, I already talked about years in the making, many more years in the doing. When we think about anything seasons and cyclical, and also this is a very important point. The Seasons of Research approach, it represents what is expected from a partner and also what that partner can expect from the other. So this isn't just a community saying, this is what I expect of you, but it's also the community saying, this is what you can expect from us as well. And yeah, when I say years plus in the making, it's kind of a funny story that we noticed several years ago that more and more researchers were calling KBIC government departments, and this was actually going on across different tribal nations and communities, that there was a lot of opportunity for us as researchers for different sponsors and sponsorships by partnering with communities. And so they were getting bombarded. And so their tribal council asked us if we could sit down and do some research and figure out like what kind of protocols and codes were out there, and write it up and provide them with some suggestions. And so that's this this other paper there called Seasons of Research. That table of all the different codes that are out there is like pages long. It took us a long time to get through it. We didn't even realize there were so many, not just in the United States, but globally. And this also, when we think about partnerships, I also like to draw attention to the symbolic petition of Chippewa chiefs. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with this. The original was drawn on birch bark, and the chiefs carried it in 1849 to Washington, D.C. And with this message of all of the chiefs, take a look, what do you see there? Yeah. And because the chiefs at the time probably already knew that we know the connections are there, but we have to draw them for DC. Yes, ma'am.
Just also that the human is kind of in the middle, not like the leader,
Hmm.
like more traditional.
Yeah, and these are all the different clan memberships. And yeah, the human isn't the lead. And so what is actually connected by all the lines? Yes. Hearts and minds. They're all connected. And what else are they connected to? The water and the land. So there's more explanation in this resource underneath, but it's just a really important part of when we think about the reservation system was established in 1854, because that was their plea, to stay in these lands. And that's why they're all still here. And then the reservation system also spread across the nation. And so thinking about these partnerships, I just had to get all these on one slide at least to show it, all of the sponsors I'm indebted to for the work shared work that we are doing. And actually, I don't know, Sylvia, if you know, but Michigan Sea Grant was my first, like, I did it. Like, I'm pretty sure one of my colleagues said something like winner, winner, chicken dinner to me. Like, that's how like exciting it was. And that project began in 2020 with the pandemic. It is now scheduled to be completed at the end of January, this coming up January. And it is a huge compilation and synthesis of KBIC knowledge and creating a big database of all of their materials and creating a knowledge guidance document to share with their many partners. And that includes research partnerships and also governance partnerships. And then we've been involved in the Build and Broaden project, the Food Sovereignty Symposium. David was a part of that as well. REU, research experiences for undergrads. Each project was designed with KBIC. So they had some different kind of engineering projects that they needed help on. Eager, Two-Eyed Seeing, and then a CNH, coupled human natural systems, and now the DICES program. And so I want to take you through this messy, when we're talking about coupled human natural systems, that's just everything. And arranged in different ways and for different people and for different places. But I want to share a little bit more about that project. And as part of our team, we have academic and tribal nation co-PIs. We are partnered with the Keweenaw Indian community and also Great Lakes Indian Fish and Wildlife Commission, also known as GLIFWIC. And we are a team of social scientists, natural scientists, engineers, public health. There's more than 20 of us, like at all different kinds of expertise, students, undergrads, graduate students as well. And we are mapping the variation of contamination across the landscape in different water bodies and in Lake Superior. and also climate-related changes, and at the same time mapping Ojibwa socio-ecological practices and values across the landscape, and really thinking about overlaying those contamination and KBIC practices to see areas of high risk, and also to inform management and possible restoration activities into the future. Also, we are putting together some information, really thinking about Ojibwa ethics and community decision making. And so what might be decision making for the federal or state government isn't always what's going on in tribal nations. We can also see some of that with the water quality standards, right? They're using the same framework, but what they're judging to be ethical in different kinds of releases or exposure levels might be different than some other governments. And then also co-creating what we're calling a tribal landscape system conceptual model. And that is what I'm going to kind of take you through at this time. Isn't that beautiful? So clearly, we're not artists, but, and this was like a ton of work, right? When you're preparing a proposal and you're trying to get that figure and see all like, there's a super long explanation, right? The gray arrows mean this, the white arrows mean that. And it took us a while, and we were kind of proud of ourselves. And what we are trying to illustrate is this outside, contamination and climate-related changes are coming into the system from outside of the landscape. And then see, we have bridging here with the community members, and then here we have the Michigan Tech researchers, and we have these different practices and expertise, but they are different. We all have these things, but they're different. And here is our landscape representing Upper Michigan. This is the vast forest. Yeah. So, we knew, like, part of what we were saying is we're going to create this. This is what we got now. But when you look at this, we want not just you to see, but also the community to see, yes, this is our landscape. This is representative of the relationships. And so here, we're settled here in the Keweenaw Bay Indie community, right there overlaying that corner of Lake Superior. And we know that we have different contamination coming in, like mercury, PCBs, dioxins, as I had just said. And then there's all these different kinds of things going on in the atmosphere that are all interrelated. And then it all comes in, it's also in the land in many different ways, through precipitation, and then through runoff in soil, in the wildlife, in our trees. Basically, these different kinds of toxic compounds then can be re-emitted, right, with a temperature change, and then settle somewhere else. And then until, that grasshopper effect, some of you probably know what I'm talking about, but much of it is based on temperature. They're going to settle in at different latitudes. And here on the ground, some of these relationships, this is manoomin or wild rice. And so we do have harvesting going on the ground as well. And then the transformation of mercury into methyl mercury. And here we have also like these different scales, kind of messy. And yet we also knew that we are going to be reliant on and use both our expertise as Western scientists, but also equitable with the the knowledge that's within the community, which has been there for almost 2,000 years. And so this is one framework that is out there. That right there is like covering up the source, but this will be shared with you. So you can click on that, Two-Eyed Seeing by Andrea Reed and her team. And then also using this seasons of research approach. You get it, right? It's clear. And so I did want to show you some of the things that have been in development with the tribal landscape system conceptual model. Is totally in draft process. And in fact, I have to say, when I share this with you, I'll just take out these drafts because it's in process, but everything else can be shared. So I ask if you don't take pictures right now. My student Cassandra Reed Van Dam will probably be kind of embarrassed because it's so in draft, but she's way too humble because it's actually very beautiful. And so there's still a lot of questions. We've had a series of interviews with our team members. We've had community workshops trying to figure out how do we improve our tribal landscape model. And so at the top, you see how she has the scale from global to local. The bottom scale, we're not so sure. We have to talk with the community more about that because is there really a division between the social and ecological scale on the ground? And then we have some other questions here about like, how do we represent the 4 directions? How do we show some of those reciprocal values like on the ground that are taking place? So there's still some questions, and also between like some of the terms, we're not sure how to represent them. We want to do as best as we can before turning some of this over to a graphic designer. And so now back to my conclusion, which probably makes a little bit more sense. Above all, prioritize land and life. Being thoughtful and intentional, deliberate, make it evident, applying our own toolboxes, approaches, research methods for the protection, restoration, and revitalization of land and life. Second, just know the ins and outs. When you do and are working with community partners, they're going to ask you questions outside of your area, right? They're just going to be about something more general. So knowing some of those ins and outs is very helpful, but it's not going to be more helpful than knowing yourself, your own strengths. Finally, being humble, requiring groundedness, vulnerability, and openness to unlearning and relearning. And using your gifts with by as others using their gifts. Okay, I believe that's it. Miigwech, thank you. So I know we ate up some of our time with the microphone, and I actually wasn't very sure how long or short this talk was, which I admitted to Sylvia on the way over here. But yes, I'd love to hear any thoughts or questions, and it's totally okay if you're just digesting all of this. Yes. Oh.
I'm wondering how reconciliation comes into play with these partnerships. Do they happen? How do they happen? Yeah.
So reconciliation, as my understanding, is kind of, I think of it as like a government to government process. I think that takes place a lot more in Canada. There has been some in the Northeast with like the Wabanaki people, but that also wasn't done very well according to the people, the Wabanaki people. I think part of that reconciliation is becoming more knowledgeable and just knowing those stories from the tribal nation perspectives, about the stories about what needs to be reconciled and also thinking like when you're saying like community or something, that you're going to have like 1,000 different perspectives in that community about what should or should not be reconciled. I know that's not a good answer.
Well, even I know it seems like you're even with
Oh, yeah.
to
Yeah.
create that institution, how do the academic partners reconcile with that history?
That is a very good question. The other thing that it makes me think of, not just land grab, but unethical research, extractive research. I will not lie that any researcher, no matter how young, fresh, innocent you are, if you're a researcher walking into a community or you are wearing that baggage. And I think it's really, really important for us to realize that when we're at the start of it, like it really is on the individual researcher to like take that off one piece at a time. And that can only be done through relationship building, whether it's land grab or, you know, for me, that baggage was really about all the harm that prior researchers had done and probably many do continue to do. So yeah, great question. Yeah, needs more conversation. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
I guess that is somewhere in the realm of my question, but I guess working with systems that have different base goals or fundamental theories around
Yeah.
land and life, how do you, again, it's kind of a similar question, but how do you actually look to bridge partnerships where you have different vested interests?
I would say you would have to have that shared priority for land and life. Like I don't know how it would work otherwise, because I work with a number of researchers who do prioritize land and life, and yet we know the systems we're in, right? But we can work within them to change them as well. Yeah. But if fundamentally, like one goal is not prioritizing land and life, in my head, it just doesn't work. Yeah. Great point. Yes.
You mentioned that there's the disproportionate consumption of fish.
Mhm.
And also in this region in general.
Yeah.
Is that demonstrated to be connected with negative health outcomes specifically as well? Or is it?
Yeah. Yeah, so there are a number of studies out there that have shown causation of different exposures to particular chemicals, but they're not like in communities as far as like the consumption that's going on now, because we all know that we are exposed all of our lifetime by different sources. So sadly, some of that scientific evidence comes from like, when it comes to mercury, where it happened in Minamata Bay, Japan, studying those populations and what happens at different levels. And then another one, there was a long-term study about PCBs and women's breast milk. And so that's how those connections were made. But like live population studies, not to my knowledge. But yeah, we see there's, you know, exposure can cause X, Y, and Z, and then we see X, Y, and Z.
So fishing is part of your treaty rights. It's being sort of compromised through the U.S. government. You know,
Mhm.
8 firms under their governance.
Mhm.
Is there any legal action or precedent for legal action to be taken in terms of protecting that resource?
So at this time, sure. So he was asking about how some of the fish consumption has become compromised, and if there's any legal action. And I would say, for one, much of what's coming into the region is from the atmosphere, not even originating in the Lake Superior Basin. Because many of those sources have been eliminated, and there are international conventions working to address some of that, and the United States is a part of the Minamata Convention, but has not ratified, like the Stockholm Convention, for example. So one of it has been brought up about even a violation of human rights as well. All of these kinds of things take resources and expertise, right, to follow through as well. So I don't think this story isn't over, right? So it is a very important thing to keep in mind. Mhm. Yeah. Yes.
No question from online.
Okay.
Can you share an example of a time where this approach to framework of partnership helped you as a researcher well in a challenging partnership moment?
I have to look at that. Oh.
Okay. Do you want me to pull it up for you?
I think I would respond to that by saying, don't ever think that any framework is going to prepare you for any situation, because it just won't. I think realizing some of the common those common ideas and about how you are approaching situations day to day are important. But I don't think I've definitely had things take place that I did not feel prepared for. And it's getting through those challenging moments, feeling like you don't have the tools, that actually helps you develop them. Helps you. Learning on the fly is a real thing. Like, it can be very valuable and important as well. So don't just, it's that intuition, right? You can't just like have that framework and think you're set, because things will come up that you will not be well equipped for. Because we're all human, remember? Yeah. Anything else?
Thanks
Okay.
to Val.
Thank you, everyone.